Welcome back to this final video so far about the NPCs used in our Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition campaign here on Charismatoac, a song Atara. In this final video I will go over the very last of the NPCs that I have available to the players at this time, and I'm going to finish off with a few thoughts about NPC creation, some of which I may already have gone over in my Storyteller Talks video, but I'm probably going to go into slightly more detail about how I do it in this one. And we finished the last video with the Kithane of Dublin, that being the Fae, and we're now on to Pentex. Pentex, of course, is going to probably play a fairly big part in the campaign, if for no other reason than because they are the traditional archenemy of the Guru in, well, most modern night campaigns. Obviously, there are ways to run campaigns without Pentex, but they are they are sort of the great overarching, all-encompassing, omnipresent, and almost omnipotent conglomerate of evil in this particular game setting. And personally, I like using them. I rarely use them as a sledgehammer. I think they're more fun to use as a scalpel, or at least as a normal hammer, in terms of working through subsidiaries and having field agents that are only loosely affiliated with them, at least until you dig a little deeper and you find out that they're much more involved. But so far they don't have many names about relating to Pentex in any kind of way here, but I'll go through the ones that we do have. First up, we have Cyprianus. Cyprianus is a black spiral dancer, but little else is known about him at this stage of the game. He's slippery though. Somehow he always seems to manage to be gone moments before his enemies reach him. Who he answers to is a good question indeed. And by that, of course, I mean that he probably has some kind of controller, some kind of handler, if you would. Most black spiral dancers involved with Pentex have some kind of boss that they report back to. Next up, we have Harold Townsend, known as Wishbone. Harold is one of a handful of black spiral dancers known for a fact to be active in Dublin. He's working with Pentex, but it's unsure if he's working for them, or if he sees their cooperation as a boon to be exploited. He's not alone, that much is known, but whether he has kinfolk supporting him, a few Fomori, a pack of other black spiral dancers, or a full warband is completely unknown at this point. All that is known is that he isn't alone. He's been talking to people he clearly considers allies. From the gifts he's displayed, he appears to be an Arun, and he's got rank, meaning he's a potentially lethal opponent for any werewolf. He's also exceedingly clever and seems to prefer to bring auxiliary forces to bear before launching his own attacks in order to weaken his enemies. And next up, we have two not NPCs in the classic sense, but organizations. So just as I had a note about the Order of Arnaud, I have a note about these companies. For the record, the logos are homemade. They are designed using various sites on the internet, so I'm not, I'm not offending any existing company out there by lashing them in with the great evil. The first one is BW Development Limited, with a slogan called "The Future in the Present." BW Development is known to be a Pentex subsidiary, but little else is clear at this point. They are located literally right next door to Aaron Blackwell's Deepdale's mansion in Bray, but there is no doubt whatsoever that they are aware of his nature and his presence. However, they have made no hostile move against him, except for a few Banes that have crawled over the garden wall in the Umbra, only to be scared off by Mr. Harris, the ghost of the groundskeeper who still inhabits the place. This, of course, should also give people an idea that Mr. Harris, for all his mild manners, is a capable ghost. And next up we have Amarach Incorporated, for a better tomorrow, as their slogan says. Amarach means tomorrow in Irish, but Amarach does not have the best interest of Ireland's future at heart. A wholly owned Pentex subsidiary, Amarach Incorporated, is moving into Dublin with the intent of offering an alternative to Uisce or Irish water. The company claims to be able to make clean drinking water out of seawater pumped in from beyond Ireland's territorial boundaries, 12 nautical miles from shore. Since that water is not owned by the Irish government, it cannot be charged, or so Amarach claims. The water crisis in Ireland was created when the Fine Gael Labour government decided to renege on its policy promises and introduce a water tax at a flat rate for every household. Protests immediately sprang up, quickly growing to public protests in the tens of thousands, with at least one Dublin demonstration counting in excess of 100,000 protesters. The reason for the protests are many, but chief amongst the grievances of the protesters is that since it's a flat rate, large households with several incomes, or the obscenely rich, or people using absurd amounts of water, pay the exact same charge, €100 a year, as a student, someone on the dole, or a senior citizen trying to eke out a living on a very, very meagre pension. Furthermore, the Irish Constitution explicitly states that water is provided by the state and paid for via general taxation, and the protest movement argues that introducing a new separate water tax means that people are paying for their heavily fluoridated drinking water twice. Given the already low quality of water in Irish faucets, Amarach is looking to cash in massively on a very, very angry population of people whose second nature it is to rebel against authority. If this actually comes to pass, Pentex will have direct access to every cooked meal in Ireland by people signing up for every meal cooked in Ireland by people signing up for this product. And if early interests is anything to go by, that counts several 100,000 households just to start with. Next up, I have a couple of locations that I've made a few details on for the players to have ready to hand. The first one is the Temple Bar district. Temple Bar, so named for its most famous licensed premise, is actually a district in Dublin running from Westmoreland Street on the eastern edge to Fishamble Street on the western side of the district. To the north, it borders the River Liffey, along Essex, Wellington, Crampton and Ashton Keys, and to the south it borders Lord Edward Street, Dame Street and College Green. The district is the most dangerous area in Dublin for the Garou, for the simple reason that it is so saturated with leeches that chances of survival are minimal. The Garou for years have adopted a live and let live, or more precisely, we'll kill you if we can get away with it and no one is likely to find out it was us attitude towards the leeches of the city, but an uptick in leech-induced violence and a sharp upturn in murders committed by their kind has started a general conflict with the Garou. So far, it is still mostly a slow-burning thing. The Garou are looking for ways to pick off the undead one at a time, and the leeches are looking for ways to expand their dominance over more than Temple Bar. In truth, they already control significant portions of Dublin. But Temple Bar is their fortress, and Garou enter at their own peril. The most curious thing about Temple Bar, however, is that both Connors and Neves groups seem to inhabit the place, and it hasn't blown up yet. This is a source of confusion to the Garou, who have a good idea that the two sectarian groups absolutely despise one another. Yet leech death caused by leeches remains low, if one doesn't count the actions of a certain ancient Spanish bloodsucker who seems hell-bent on wiping her own kind off the face of Ireland. And lastly, we have 3 Dragonflies to 2. The 3 Dragonflies to 2 studio is located in the Merchant's Ark in Temple Bar, leading straight to Halfpenny Bridge. It's run by two leeches, George Wallace and Valerie McManus, and as a result, it's only open after hours. While there's no doubt they produce the finest tattoos in Dublin, the strange nature of the two leeches running it, George Wallace in particular, means this is a place someone might want to pay a visit at some point, which obviously has happened now in character. And other than that, I have some handouts, and I have a tab down here for the deceased, for people who are well, gone from the campaign. And the handouts are mostly for notes for the players to remember certain specific things, like the amazing poem that was created by Taliesin's player to describe the rite of passage, this very long thing called the Prelude of the Fated Six. There's a symbol for the Raven's Eye. There's what parts they have of Raven's Prophecy so far, and some house rules and some general rules. So those are the things that are there. Now that I'm done with the rundown of the NPCs of this campaign, I wish to add a few things about NPC creation and management for any would-be storyteller listening. Obviously, I'm sure you all have your own ideas about how to do this, but allow me to at least offer my take on it. Obviously, the first thing to do about NPCs is to make them real people. This does take a lot of work, and I'm not saying that absolutely every NPC that every situation calls for should be completely fleshed out in all itty-bitty, minute little detail with a complete backstory. The clock behind the desk at the post office that the players visit one day it doesn't really have to have that much backstory, unless one of them decides to basically make that clock a recurring character in the story. If that's the case, then obviously you're in a position where you're probably going to have to come up with a backstory and some personality and so on for Mr. Average. But normally speaking, at least make sure that the players are at least make sure that the players have a way of interacting with and caring for characters that they come across as NPCs. It does allow for greater immersion into the story. Now, let me be clear here that some players don't really want to engage with NPCs. I'm fully aware of that. There are players who, for one reason or another, believe that NPCs are largely unimportant to a campaign, that what matters is the player characters' interaction with one another, the way they deal with one another and the way they deal with the world. This is a very player-centric kind of attitude. It's also understandable, and I'm not saying that particular attitude is wrong. I'm saying that it's very much a matter of personal taste, and that is not to my personal taste. Both as a player and as a storyteller or GM, I prefer to have realistic people that I can interact with. Yes, I know it takes work. Using a virtual tabletop like Roll20 or any of the other virtual tabletops out there, it does make this a little bit easier, because you can set up their character sheets if they have to have one, or at least some notes about their personality and so on, right there on the screen, and everybody can read them, and you can make whatever alterations to them you need as the game progresses. So not a problem there. But to not give the players that satisfaction leaves them in a very sterile kind of world, and that makes it very hard for people to actually immerse themselves in well, not just in the setting, but in the story you're trying to tell. Why should they care that Old Mother Goose has been killed in her cottage if you haven't actually made Old Mother Goose someone that they might want to care about? Why should they? Why should they care that the village is about to get burnt down by the horrible trolls, or that the apartment building is being held hostage by a group of slavering machine gun and chainsaw toting Fomori? If you haven't made the people living in that apartment complex real and relatable, and someone that they can in some way have a full interaction with, and get something out of that way. And it should not always be a matter of if you do this for me, I will do that for you. It's not always a give and take any more than the world in general is give and take. Personally, I'm very much in favor of having scenes involving NPCs whenever the opportunity arises naturally. This isn't something that you should make the players get into unless they themselves seek it out, obviously, because then it'll just feel phony and forced. But I'm very much in favor of creating scenes where absolutely nothing happens, where nothing whatsoever of any importance to the story takes place, but where the players have a short time to engage with the world around them as their players in a calm, down to earth, peaceful manner, if that's what they choose to do, simply to get to feel that side of their characters as well. And in order to do so, you might find that difficult if you don't have NPCs that they can engage with. For example, in this werewolf campaign, such an example could be that the players go and sit in the cairn one night, and an entire game session might go by without anything of any importance happening, except that the players sit there and talk to the NPCs, get to know them a little bit better, get to have a feeling that their players that their characters, that their in-character selves have an opportunity to relax, de-stress a little bit, maybe have a laugh, share a song, share a story, get into an argument for all I know. Something like that. Something that doesn't have any kind of impact on the overarching story, but which simply serves to let them develop their characters. This happens, in my experience, happens very often through interaction with NPCs, and the more realistic and the more engaging these NPCs are, the easier it is for most players to do this. As a player, I would also urge people to consider that when interacting with NPCs, the NPCs actually, at least if they are played the way I would suggest they are played, they would actually have emotions. They would have legitimate feelings, and if they are exploited, if they are being used, if they are being treated badly in any kind of way, they aren't likely to want to help you next time. Don't expect these characters, or NPCs as they are, to simply sit there and take it every time. That would be, not only would it be unrealistic, but it would also lead to a skewing of the dynamic between player and storyteller, where in my personal philosophy, this is a matter of a cooperation. You have a cooperative effort between players and storytellers in order to create a story. It is not a matter of player versus storyteller. It's never that. For one thing, it's a battle that no player can and should ever win. The storyteller always has all the weapons on their hands. They hold all the trump cards. In fact, they hold all the cards, because quite simply, they can arbitrarily kill off characters at any time they want. That would also make them bad storytellers and bad GMs, at least in my opinion. But they do have that power. Consequently, it should never be a power struggle. It should always be a matter of cooperating. And one of the most important tools that the GM or the storyteller has, through which to facilitate this cooperation would be NPCs. They are the storyteller's voice in the game world, after all. Consequently, I would also say that not every NPC out there has to be either an ally or an enemy. And in fact, not even every character or NPC out there has to be an ally, an enemy, or someone waiting to be either. It's perfectly fine for the players to come into contact with people, even powerful people, who have absolutely no interest in getting in these characters' way, all the while they have absolutely no interest in assisting the characters, because, well, quite frankly, they have absolutely no interest in the characters. And they don't really, the characters don't really have a way of engaging them. They are just part of the game world, and people like that exist. It can be frustrating for players to come across such people. Let's say, for example, that they have an issue with someone. Let's say in this particular vampire campaign, let's say that one of their friends from the Sept was incarcerated. That should be a situation they can do something about, because, oh, lo and behold, Aaron has a contact in the Garda that might be able to help them get this person out of incarceration. Lo and behold, as I said, that would potentially fix the problem. Now, if Aaron didn't have this contact in the Garda, then they might sit there and think, oh, but we have all these great things that we can offer. We are powerful beings in our own right, and while we can't tell the Garda this, we would be able to somehow ingratiate ourselves and help them. And then maybe they would do something for us in return. One, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, sort of thing. But then they come across this officer of the law who simply happens to be incorruptible and who has absolutely no interest whatsoever in their pleas for mercy or in their offers to help with something if he can just look the other way concerning their particular friend. That sort of situation would be deeply frustrating to most players, and it would be something that would be part of the game experience. Don't be afraid, as a storyteller, to have NPCs who behave like that. Not everything in the game world is about the player characters. A lot of players want that to be the case. They want the entire game world to revolve around them. And some campaigns work fine that way. In my experience, having a campaign where the players eventually grow to realize that they are simply players in a much bigger game which is going on all around them, even without their participation or without them influencing the game, leads to very good stories, because it can, especially in a setting like the World of Darkness, where hopelessness has to be a thing. It has to be part of the mood that the players are up against something so monumentally, enormously powerful and hostile that they simply cannot win. If you play werewolf, that will be the worm. If you and the impending apocalypse. If you play vampire, it would be the imminent return of the antediluvians and the end of the world, as they see it, as Gehenna, as they call it, and similar for all the rest of the supernatural creatures as well. They all face their own extinction for whatever reason. They all have their own reasons and their own myths, and the fact that they are fighting this losing battle is really the backdrop of the entire campaign. In this campaign, the player characters now have a Sept Alpha saying, I want us to fight to win, not to stave off the inevitable. See, this is an example of what I spoke of before when I was referring to NPCs being real people. Cat Markison is a fleshed out character. I could pick up Kat and play her as a player character in another campaign without any difficulty, mainly because she's one of the most important NPCs in the story, so I've done an inordinate amount of work on her. Um, but Kat doesn't want to simply lean back and say, "Oh, we're all gonna die," because that's what all the myths are saying, and all the legends, and all the signs, and all the portents, and all the omens, and all ravens rattling and prattling, and yada 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 yada. She doesn't want to accept that she's doomed. She's running one understrength set in Ireland at this time, and she still sits there and tells the players, we have to turn this around, we have to fight to win. And the players, for the most part at least, are buying in. They are sufficiently invested in that character and sufficiently interested in her, and they think highly enough of her to actually buy into this. The players are perfectly well aware that the whole premise of Werewolf as a game is that the werewolves are fighting a losing battle. And yet, because Cat has managed to become so important to them, they still end up going along with, yeah, let's see if we can't create that sliver of hope and fight back and be those exemplars to Guru everywhere else, that they can see that we could possibly win this. And you only get to that point if your players are willing to suspend their disbelief long enough to basically take the rulebook, put it on the shelf and say, this isn't a game, just for 5 seconds. This isn't a game. This isn't me looking out through my character's eyes. This is the character speaking. If you can get into the head of your character like that for a few moments, put the rules aside and forget they are there, to me personally, that's the moment I have played role-playing games for 30 years for. I've said before that I'm not big on rules, but I'm very big on story and narrative. The World of Darkness is an excellent system for a storyteller like myself, because the rules aren't exactly a sledgehammer. They're not a mallet that can be used to pound people into submission. A good comparison would be with an infamous 1990s fantasy role-playing game called Rolemaster. Rolemaster was quite popular. I've played it myself, and it was quite popular. But it was also the epitome of rules-heavy. You must own 55 different rule books, or you will never be able to get by in this sort of game system. This was the kind of game where you could literally buy book after book after book after book that contained absolutely nothing except crit tables. So if somebody inflicted a critical hit on someone using anything from a table leg to a rotten egg, you would probably be able to find a crit table in Rolemaster that would fit the bill. That sort of game system is not for me. I appreciate that some people think that rules are extremely important and highly enjoyable and something that they can spend hours and hours and hours and days upon days upon days discussing, debating, getting to know, getting every single facet of it, all the minutiae in place. But for me, it's always going to come down to the interaction between players and the world, or the players' characters, I should say, the characters and the world that they exist in. And in order to do that, the characters they surround themselves with have to be real. Another example of how this is done really well is in the Matrix movies, where For those who have seen these movies, where in the first movie the character Neo is shown that the whole world he lives in is basically a computer generated falsehood. It doesn't exist. It's a computer dream, and that in fact all the people that he interact with in this computer generated dream, or at least many of them, don't really exist. They are simply computer generated pixels, quite frankly, collections of pixels. This is illustrated by a woman in a red dress, which is shown to walk through the screen, and which captures Neo's attention, and as this is explained to him. That situation for me always illustrated what good NPCs would be like, because Neo doesn't know until it's explained to him that he is in fact a player character in a great role-playing game, because all the characters that he's been surrounding himself with up until that point have been believable enough that he thought that he was in the real world, so to say. And yet, in Neo's particular case, there's been one or two things along the way that have been glitches, or the storyteller, in his case the computer, hasn't been perfect, and there have been a few issues where he has come to suspect that there's more to it. The same thing can be said about any role-playing game, that the storyteller in a role-playing game is like the computer in the Matrix. However, hopefully a far more benevolent entity. But the NPCs have to be that believable and have to be that real, that the players don't suspect, so to say. The characters in the game feel that they're in something real, because when they then get that moment where they sit and they forget for just a second that it is only a game, before they get pulled back to reality, that's a thing of beauty. In my own personal opinion, I realize that there are probably a lot of you who feel differently about role-playing games and who go for something completely different, but this is my video and this is what is important to me. So when that is said, I've also said in a different situation that it's important that there are NPCs of different power levels. And this is another thing that I feel is important to underscore, and this is not just in relation to the World of Darkness, this is in relation to any role-playing game out there. If you run a long campaign, be it a pre-written one that you may have purchased from somewhere, or be it one that you have created yourself off the cuff, or that you're improvising, or where you've even done a ton of work of your own in preparation, give the players a chance to shine. Yes, it's necessary to challenge them. Any role-playing game where the player characters go from strength to strength and they're never properly challenged is probably going to get extremely boring for most players very, very swiftly. If they're always the, if you'll pardon the Firefly reference, big damn heroes, then the situation is probably going to get extremely tedious for them very quickly. But once in a while, they should also have that break where they feel like, yeah, we won. It may not be the war, but we did at least win this particular battle. It may be in a fantasy setting that they help defend, let's say they help defend a small village from an onrushing tribe of maniacal orcs out to destroy and kill everyone living there. Now there are something like, maybe let's say there's 150 people living in the village, and out of those 150, maybe 20 of them have ever held any weapon apart from a scythe or a shovel. So the players may or may not try to involve these 20 people and make them some kind of militia or whatever. But primarily, the player characters are the ones getting up, like the Seven Samurai of Kurosawa fame, and and defend the village against the onrushing horde of evil creatures out to kill everyone. And they win. And they might even win very, very handily, because they might simply be so much stronger than the average orc that they just plow their way through this invasion force. That is absolutely all right. That is okay. Once in a while, it's actually good for players to have that feeling, because it gives them that feeling of, yes, I'm powerful, I can do stuff. What I do in this world can make a difference, and it can matter. Again, remember, at least if you ask me, role-playing games should never be a matter of player versus storyteller. It should always be a matter of player and storyteller creating a story that everyone thinks is fun. And if that includes saving a village from a bunch of marauding orcs, or if that includes 6 fated werewolves coming, running into a burning building to save the school children caught on in the private school on the 3rd and 4th floors, and actually managing to get all the kids out, then yes, let them have that, and let them have that feeling that they did that when others would have failed, because they are the heroes. It makes it much easier for them to then later deal with a potential defeat, or it makes it easier for them to at least think, oh yeah, sure, this great evil bad guy that we're going up against, we can actually beat him, because remember, we were awesome enough that we saved that village. Of course we can kill the overpowered Lich sitting in his dungeon of doom and gloom and eternal horror halfway across the world, because yay, we just defeated 2,000 orcs or something. Heroes need to actually be heroic once in a while in order to qualify for the term. This means that from time to time, the NPCs that the characters come into contact with are going to be not very powerful at all. They're going to be weak, and they're going to need help. And the players, if they should so choose to give that help, are able to do so. That is a net win for the campaign, because the players get to feel good. However, there can also be a net gain if you make NPCs very powerful, even so powerful that the player characters don't really stand a chance of beating them. Now, let me just be very clear here. I am not a fan of arbitrarily killing players off just to make a point. That's not what I'm calling for here. But there should be such a thing as a villain or an overarching villainous entity of some kind that the hero can struggle against, and even feel that they might get small victories against, only to see that they lose ground somewhere else. And for a while they might even lose ground faster than they make it in a game like World of Darkness. There's even a likelihood that they are going to lose ground consistently. Whereas any victory they might get is small and possibly even very temporary, because again, the whole setting of the game is to slowly make the characters lose. But if you tell them that all the time, that is also going to be demoralizing or boring. If the players never have the sensation that they are in fact good enough or strong enough to do something, even if they just manage to pull a victory off by the skin of their teeth, that would still be a victory. But once in a while there can be something said for the power of showing the players you're not always going to win. For that reason, you might need very powerful NPCs, entities that are so strong that the players cannot realistically defeat them, at least not permanently. A good example from other pop culture here would be the classic 007 movies, James Bond movies with Sean Connery fighting the massively evil organization known as Spectre. Now, I know they've reintroduced Spectre in the reboot of 007 with a new sort of story and background. But in the original version, every single time he defeated some nefarious plan by Spectre, they would still pop up somewhere else. Marvel has a version of this themselves where they have their organization known as Hydra. Of course, the whole point of a Hydra is if you cut off one head, two more will grow. Pretty much what they say in that organization as well. And so even if you do get that victory by chopping off one head here, two more are going to spring up somewhere else, and if you cut off one of them, then two more, and so on. So slowly you're going to get swamped under the there are simply eventually there are going to be so many heads of this Hydra that you can't win. And the players can benefit from having that feeling that they are not invincible. It may make them go into other encounters more carefully. It might make them look for NPC allies who can in some way assist them, instead of simply saying, "Oh, but we are the big damn heroes," to reuse the Firefly reference from before. We can do anything. We don't need any help because, rawr, we can do anything, us. And then they get then they learn the very hard way that no, you can't in fact beat this extremely powerful organization or this maddeningly powerful entity or person or whatever. And if the players are then smart and they have the option, then they might go out and say, all right, but we have got something like 30 different friends, all of whom are very capable in their own right. Let's call on them and see if we can't come up with some kind of battle plan that involves the use of all these resources that we have. Now, that I'm going to end this on is to say that if players are clever, they will start to see NPCs that they come across as resources, not necessarily resources to be used, because then, as I said before, NPCs are probably going to resent being used simply as a renewable resource in that way, or in some cases a non-renewable resource. They probably won't particularly enjoy that. Nobody would. We wouldn't enjoy that ourselves, most of us anyway, in real life. But as long as the players use these resources in a respectful kind of way, asking their friends or allies for help, maybe calling in some favors if they are owed some, then that is one way of, again, broadening the perspective of the game, and make it a larger, more varied, and more interesting kind of game. And hey, maybe players might enjoy being the heroes leading a merry band of powerful beings into a great and glorious and truly epic battle against some kind of incredibly evil, nasty, mean, horrible villain. And then, they might just vanquish that villain. And if that's the end of your campaign, then obviously that's a good thing. Or they might come back next week or in 2 weeks or whenever for the next game session, only to learn that, oh wait, we destroyed all the heads of that Hydra except for, well, that one over there, and therefore it's still alive and it's now regrowing its heads one at a time. Or okay, we slew the Hydra over there, but shit, its good friend the Basilisk just sprang up over there, so now we're going to have to deal with a completely new threat. That is... then the game doesn't have to end. But the players have to continue to feel that the interaction they have with the NPCs they meet makes the game worth playing. And if it only becomes a matter of, in my opinion, the player-centric view that everything in the end has to be about them and nothing else, games, as I have experienced it, peter out, lose their focus, and grow boring after a while, because nothing you do will feel, as a player, will feel quite right. In essence, the player will end up feeling like Neo, realizing that the world he's surrounded with probably isn't quite real, and that would be a shame. These are some of my thoughts on NPCs and on game mastering in general, and how I would and how I do run my campaigns. It's very much off the cuff. It's very much a matter of momentary inspiration and improvisation. I'm also, shall we say, blessed with a group of players who are wild and anarchic and never do exactly what you plan for them or what you expect them to do anyway. They have very, very different tastes in what they think is fun in role-playing games. And yet we somehow make it work. And I like to think that I do my part in making it work by giving them a game world which is sufficiently interesting and engaging for them to actually want to, well, come back next week to see if, well, the heads of the Hydra have regrown, or if they're going to have to fight some other vicious bad guy out there. On that note, I'm going to end these videos about NPCs in this campaign. As I said, I might make a follow-up video of this kind later on when a number of new NPCs have been introduced that you, as the players, would have to know about. There are a couple of NPCs waiting in the wings that might be interesting when they pop up, for example, that are going to probably have a very significant impact on the campaign, but that is all in the future. And for now, this is me signing off. If you had any use for any of this, by all means leave a comment in the section below. As usual, I will ask you, please be nice about it. And yeah, I'll see you guys around for some more talk or some more role-playing in future videos. Thank you for listening.